Okay, can you hear me now? All right, hello. Good evening. First of all, let me just say thank you so much for being here. I'm not sure how folks traveled here, but just want to express so much love and so much gratitude for you being present with us. I'm gonna just say a couple disclaimers. This smile that's on my face is going to be here the whole 90 minutes or hour that we're here. So just want to share, if you see this joy, this light that's coming from me, it's because I am so incredibly moved and proud and also deeply honored to be sitting next to this human being to my left. I'm so moved. And I am honored and moved for a number of reasons. One, you may know that this is my brother. We share that last name. But even more than Philip, Dr. Philip McHarris being my brother, he is a human being that I have so much respect, so much admiration, so much love for him as a thought leader, for him as an activist, for him as someone who has chosen in his life's work to be a rebel. Someone who has the courage to choose, to dream, and imagine a world that is deserving of his people. My brother, Dr. McHarris, has chosen to dedicate his scholarship, has decided to dedicate his personal and political life to not just being in rigorous study around the forces that seek to destroy us and our people, but he has devoted his life to making everything that he creates an invitation for us to imagine, for us to dream. Because as we all know, the most powerful tools of those who seek to undermine our liberation is to make our freedom seem impossible. And so the work of people like Philip V. McHarris is so critical. This book is so powerful because it both gives a history and a context of policing in this country, but it challenges us. It provokes us to imagine and to dream of a world without police, of a world that actually is deserving of our people, of us. So let me just say a few things. I am honored. I am joyful. I am filled with hope to be sitting next to Philip McHarris. So I'm just going to say that as I start us off. So Philip is going to begin reading a few excerpts from his book. And as we go through this moment, folks can invited right when we finish to go in and get the book, because we'll be doing signings right after, and I'll ask Philip a few questions. But I also want to ground in why this book is so critical for this moment. We are living in what feels like such increasingly violent times. Does that feel real for y'all? We are living in times that feel so violent, so painful, so filled with heartbreak. Who in here has felt anxious? Who in here has felt confused? Who here has felt rage and frustration about the state of the world that we are living in? And so we find ourselves, whether it is tens of thousands of people who are being massacred and slaughtered and killed in a genocide in Palestine, or it is our people here in this country who are being slaughtered in their homes, killed in their homes. And I'm thinking of Sonia Massey, who needed support, who needed help, and was killed in her own home. We are reminded every single moment just how violent this world is. And so this book is coming out at a time of great violence, of great peril. But this is also a time of great possibility. This is also a time that is essentially we are being called into answer a fundamental question. Who are we willing to be? Who are we willing to become in order to make a better world more possible? And a book like this, what it does to us, it calls us in to imagine, to dream. And so it's such a profound time that we have this book, and particularly at this moment. So I want to ground us in that. And then as we move into the rest of this discussion, we're going to open it up for Q&A, but I want folks to also be invited into questions that you have in relationship to this book and also in this moment. But first, I actually want to turn it over to Philip to read for us a little bit. How does that sound? Are y'all with me? Okay, beautiful.
Thank you. Woo! I thought I wasn't gonna get emotional to the end, but we're here now. Thank you so much for that introduction to my dear sister. A lot of the ideas that I'll be talking about have been shaped, by her as well as my other sister and family. And so that was that was a way to come in. So thank you for that. Thank you to the People Forum. Appreciate you opening your space for this. I'm very much looking forward to this discussion. This is a special one, hometown. Thank you all for coming out, and it's really great to see you all and be in space with you. All right, this is my book, y'all. This is my book. Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna read some excerpts just to ground the conversation, and give some context, but also give some insight into the feeling of the book, the texture of it. So I'm going to start where the book starts. And the book starts here with a quote from Octavia Butler. And Octavia Butler says, "There's nothing new under the sun, but there are new suns." It's also the 100th birthday of James Baldwin, so I'm going to start in the next place that the book starts, with James Baldwin. "Now, what I've said about Harlem is true of Chicago, Detroit, Boston, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. It's true of every northern city with a large Negro population, and the police are simply the hired enemies of this population. They are present to keep the Negro in his place and to protect white business interests. And they have no other function. They are, moreover, even in a country which makes the very grave error of equating ignorance with simplicity, quite stunningly ignorant. And, since they know that they are hated, they are always afraid. One cannot possibly arrive at a more surefire formula for cruelty. I'm writing a report, which is also a plea for the recognition of our common humanity. Without this recognition, our common humanity will be proved in unutterable ways. My report is also based on what I myself know, for I was born in Harlem and raised there. Neither I nor my family can be said ever really to have left. We are, perhaps, no longer as totally at the mercy of the cops and the landlords as once we were. In any case, our roots, our friends, our deepest associations are there, and there is only about 15 blocks away." James Baldwin, a report from occupied territory. In 1966, James Baldwin published a report from occupied territory in The Nation magazine. In the report, he described the realities of police violence within the context of poverty and systemic racism in black communities. Importantly, Baldwin charged, "These things happen in all our Harlems, every single day. If we ignore this fact and our common responsibility to change this fact, we are sealing our doom." These words have never rung more true. Decades later, we are still trapped in cycles of violence from the state and within our communities. This book presents my notes from occupied territory, from a society that polices crisis to preserve power. I share these thoughts not only to describe the conditions of black communities and beyond as they relate to police, but to chart a way out, for us to dream about what could be in a fresh new society. I don't remember the first time I heard of police abolition, but I know I was drawn toward the concept from the start. The idea that society can exist with no police took me some time to wrap my head around. It required me to put myself into a world that doesn't exist yet, to imagine the different ways we'd respond to crisis and harm, and ultimately respond to the needs that people have. It was hard for me at times to think about all the terrible things people are capable of and ask myself, if there are no police, but there's a shooting or home invasion or domestic violence, how do folks get help? What other resources are available for people to rely upon in dangerous situations? How can we prevent these moments from happening altogether? How do we create a fundamentally less violent society? As we explore these questions together, you will learn that I'm certain that policing is not the answer to social problems. In the first part of the book, I will address the reasons why, In the final chapters, I will share a vision of a world without police and take us on a journey where we will learn about how people around the world are proving that a world without policing is possible. This book answers questions about what we would do if there were no police. It may sound jarring, unrealistic, and impossible. It may bring up fears, experiences, and questions. But through taking this journey, I'm positive that you'll understand why a growing number of people see police abolition as a clear answer to a persistent problem. And for those who may already believe in the promises of abolition, Beyond Policing will offer visions and bridges forward. All right, so I'll start there, but then I'll read. That's the part of the introduction, and then I also have interludes, which serve as interconnected tissue for the book. And I just want to read interlude 1, and it includes my family. So thank you all to family and friends, my mom, my siblings, my aunt. But yeah, I just want to read from interlude 1. Part A, Notes from Ferguson. I'm still searching for language to describe my experiences in Ferguson during the 2014 uprising. There's something about the tear gassed, the militarized police, the military, and at times these days it's hard to tell the difference between the two. The batons, the shields, the guns, the deaths, and the way that they can affect the body and the spirit that make them incredibly difficult to capture. I remember one night in particular. It was dark, cold, the air was thick, and I've yet to shake the grasp loose, and I may never do so. It was the weekend that a grand jury decided not to indict Darren Wilson. Protesters gathered near and across from where a line of police and military stood in front of the Ferguson Police Department building, protecting the building that housed the police department that had taken on the responsibility of generating revenue for the city off the backs of black bodies. A group of protesters entered the street. There were clear orders to stay on the opposite end, though as is done in rebellions, folks were challenging state power. There was an announcement that if the protesters did not return to the sidewalk, they might be arrested, and when their orders were not met, the police and military organized themselves as if they were preparing for combat, and within seconds rushed a line of protesters in the street. They confronted the group violently, and when they began to push, body slam, and arrest people, everyone who had mobilized, even those that in the street, ran. There was an instinct to run because folks knew the extent of state's arbitrary and wanton violence. At the time, I was with my oldest sister, Nisha. We immediately began running with the crowd, and as I started to turn to make sure my sister was still with me, I realized we had gotten separated in the chaos of the crowd running. During that time, police and military descended from every single direction where there was a way out. By the time I was almost fully turned around, I heard my name. Philip. I turned to where the voice had come from, and I saw my sister walking up a hill where the police were descending. Their tactical lights flashing to disorient and their guns leveled to the protesters in front of them, including my sister. The guns appeared to be shotguns filled with beanbags. I yelled her name back, she turned, and we rejoined. That moment made clear to me the power of the state and what the courage of love looks like in the face of state violence. And it's that type of love that has allowed black folks to imagine the impossible in the face of terror. I later asked my sister what she'd planned to do, and she said she didn't know. She'd moved because her love had overwritten the fear of the state. So I've learned a great deal over the years about state violence, resistance, and the courage to love and imagine. Those nights under the clouds of tear gas, surrounded by militarized police and the military itself, have given me the language to describe exactly what a just democracy isn't, more clearly than I can tell you what one looks like. Because for black people in this country, there have never been such things as lives free of state violence. Whether it be by the police, the public assistance office, schools, local hospitals, or the continued political decisions that prioritize profit and punishment over black lives. But this book represents my analyses of the roots of police violence, the complexity and persistence of it today, and its range and all its social and political implications, and ways to move forward. Principally, I put forth a vision, my vision, of a world, a safer world, without policing your cages. When I think back to the night in Ferguson with my sister, who was willing to walk into anything out of love, what surfaces is this idea of courage. To create a new world requires the courage to imagine, and the courage to do what seems impossible, to actualize dreams of freedom. Thank you.
I made no commitments not to cry. So if y'all catch me out here. Thank you for that, Philip. So I have a few questions for you. But first, how are you?
I'm all right, you know?
Yeah?
It's
How
my
are you
first
feeling?
book, you know, so I'm just, thank y'all. So, you know, I'm just holding that energy. I'm feeling the full gambit of emotions, but I'm feeling really good to be around friends and family and loved ones and, you know, people who came out to support. So thank you all.
Beautiful. Also, as was said earlier, shout out to the family in the room. So my first question to you is, how did you know you were going to write this book?
How did I know I was going to write?
And what was the moment? What was the moment when you realized you were going to, this is the book you were going to write?
You know, I think there's a lot of moments. I think that, you know, I can trace it in a number of different ways. You know, I think I can think about childhood and the experiences of myself and family. I can think about, you know, being in college and wanting to learn more about policing, and finding it a little difficult to find some critical histories. You know, I can think to grad school when, you know, I was also searching for more and more language and more understanding, and at times found it difficult. But I know, you know, I started to have a lot of questions specifically in organizing spaces, you know, under the movement for Black Lives umbrella. And, you know, I think it all just germinated into a number of questions. And so, you know, I think it's just been a process of learning and uncovering, and asking questions, you know. And the most important question is asking why. And I've been thankful to be in the community of family, scholars, friends that have helped me, you know, answer and ask different sorts of questions.
That's great. That's great. So I actually want to start where the book begins. You did a pretty rigorous, detailed account of the history of policing and the early stages of policing. And I'm curious, as people go through this history, what do you feel like is one key takeaway that you're hoping people understand as they read your book in terms of the history of policing in general and in the U.S. specifically?
Excellent question. Thank you for that. Okay, so as I mentioned, I was in grad school and I had a number of questions around policing. And so, you know, I was looking for different histories, and I found that there were a decent amount of critical histories around incarceration. But, you know, a decade ago, I was finding it a little bit more difficult to understand the history and context of policing. But it was something that I you know, was interested in. There was a whole movement transpiring. My research was looking at policing, and I kept, you know, wanting to dig and ask, like, where did this come from? Why is this here? You know, why does it look the way it does? Why is this, you know, there's these cycles of violence? And so, you know, in many ways, this history section, the first part, it represents what I wanted to read when I was in that place, and I wanted to understand, you know, where this entity, where this apparatus came from. And so it took on from there. And so I think the main takeaways is that policing from its very onset was structured on race class control. You know, that was a central, you know, that was the central function when we think about, you know, whether it's slave patrols or Texas Rangers in the West who were, you know, on the front line of indigenous and Mexican land dispossession and violence against Mexican indigenous populations, or in the North, when, you know, policing served as a form of labor control and to protect capital. And so, you know, I think that is a central aspect that we see is rearticulated. It might look differently at different periods of time, but we see that core focus, you know, rearticulated. And the other thing is that it's always been transnational, right? There's never a context where it emerged in its own sort of siloed context. And so for that, we can look to models of slave patrols in the Caribbean, that the slave patrols in the Carolinas emerged and drew sort of inspiration from in many different ways, those models. Or we can look to Ireland and to the ways in which British colonial powers suppressed or repressed Irish populations. And so we can look across context and we can look until today, right? When we look at the logics and structures of policing, the relationship to Israeli occupation. And so, I think there's a number of different contours. And what you see is that policing was not designed in the interest of safety. It was designed in many ways as a tool, as I mentioned, for race and class control. And the other aspect is to offer a sense of security that for those who are deemed worthy, right? And so, but that category is always, it's always precarious. And even in the case of where there is some semblance of security, what I argue is that it's not actually safety. Safety is something deeper, and more complicated. And, security is different, right? The security of privilege, of power, and that semblance of what that seems like is very different than when we think about safety. And in many ways, even what, as it currently exists, the policing system says that it doesn't do, what it even articulates that it does in many ways.
Thank you. I've been doing, I'm an abolitionist, and specifically, I believe in building a world that without police, without carceral systems, and for years I've studied the history of policing, and I found myself page by page in reading this book, learning things I had no idea about the history of policing. So for folks who are really curious about the history of policing, I recommend getting this book. We have it here. It's a little plug. But the next question really speaks to this piece around abolition. So many folks, you're an abolitionist, I'm an abolitionist. Many folks have a position and are committed to sort of building a world without police, prisons, carceral systems. And simultaneously, we live in a world where many people, if you ask them, they don't necessarily have that they can't necessarily say they can see a world in that very moment that without police. And what I find what your book does is it helps break down essentially the role and function of policing, historically and today, the danger of policing within around the world and within the U.S., and also an invitation to think about what safety could actually be and alternatives to the policing that can actually offer people safety. So can you just share how you approached writing this book so that people, no matter where they are in terms of their positions around the police, in terms of their own politics or belief system, can you just talk about how you wrote this book to really be an offering to anybody who, at the end of the day, what they understand is they don't feel safe. Deep down, they know that the police is not offering them safety, but are not quite sure what the next step is.
I like that question. Thank you for that. So the police have been around for a while, and they've created sort of an ideological stronghold, right? So it's such an immediate association that when people have conversations around safety, they immediately think police, right? We know that for most of human history, policing in this iteration has not existed, but because of socialization and a number of, social institutions that socializes us into how to understand and think about matters of safety and justice, policing and the criminal legal system has, dominated our imagination for how to understand that. And so I think it's which is why I think it makes sense that people either have that association or, may not have that association, but may say like, well, then what does that look like? And so I think that makes a lot of sense. And so I wrote the book, and the reason why, I wrote it in terms of like the history, the current state, and then futures of thinking beyond policing. And I wrote it in that way because I want anybody, who exists along, any aspect, who's interested in learning more and delving into this, who might say, like, I don't know about this police abolition stuff. I don't know about, like, what that looks like. I don't really get it, and we live in a world that doesn't have safety. So then it's like, if that's supposed to be the safety intervention, then what, And so, I wrote this to really try to engage in that kind of discussion and to really, as a point of entry, to say, okay, I hear you, so let's talk. And that's really the way that I tried to generate it, and to say, and the reason why I wrote this book is it's not just about policing. It's because I'm deeply concerned about, the broader conditions around the fact that many people navigate day-to-day lives and don't feel safe in places where there's a lot of police, and many people feel, unsafe because of the police, and a number of different other, kinds of fears of conflict and violence and harm. And so, I think collectively, that is what sort of was the inspiration, what really sort of undergirded my approach to writing this. So I wrote it with a lot of hope that anybody across, wherever they stand can read it and say, like, okay, but I heard about this. I heard people talking about, defund or abolition, and I have a deeper understanding. And the fact that this book was written in the interest of creating a safer world, and that is exactly why I believe we need to move beyond policing.
And I'm actually going to invite you to read the chapter of your book, if that's all right. See, he's still my brother, so I got to look at him like, is that all right? We didn't prep on this. We didn't brief on this before. But I would love for you to read an excerpt of the chapter of the book where you begin to sort of create this world. You invite folks in to imagine with you of a world without police. So if it's okay, I'm going to ask a couple questions and then invite you in to read that.
Let's do it.
Is that okay?
I wasn't expecting that. I had my excerpts, planned out, but
see, my bad.
I'm good though. Let's do
Transparency.
it. Let's do
this
it.
This is
Let's
a family
do it.
vibe at this very moment.
Let's do it.
Time. But you can always, anyway.
I love
so
it.
thank you for doing that.
For sure.
And because what I really do appreciate, and then we can go over to another excerpt. I'll just say a couple words and maybe ask a question, then you can read another excerpt. But what I really appreciate about this book is just as Philip was saying, oftentimes when you speak to folks, whether it is, a friend, a neighbor, and you talk about a world without police, a world without prisons, oftentimes we are faced with these really fundamental questions that we should be faced with, because that is the work of scholarship and organizers when faced with those questions. And what you do is you really challenge this and you talk about that it's sort of an ideological stronghold that folks deep down know that the police don't offer safety, and simultaneously are not necessarily always imagining a reality without that we don't have carceral systems. But what I love about this book is that you talk about how there's so many ways in which our people have already been in practice about engaging in alternatives, and that we actually, if we leaned into this idea that it is possible that we can actually build something that actually provides what people need, that actually can provide safety, that we can actually provide sort of the common sense alternative in a world where we actually are faced with a reality where we're supposed to swallow what doesn't work and told that whatever we wish for, whatever we need, whatever we dream of is actually just naive, immature, and impossible. That it challenges that this is actually an invitation into awakening in what really makes the most sense for what we need. But I'm going to ask a couple questions and go back to you for the excerpt. I'm just curious, as you were writing this book, what do you feel like was the hardest thing for you?
All of it. It's like, no, it definitely, I say this and I don't say it lightly, but writing a book was definitely one of the hardest things I've ever done. It was a process. Thankfully I had the support of, many people in this room that helped me, work through, advise, revise. But it was definitely challenging. And I would say, one of the particular parts that was challenging is like, what do you put in and what do you leave out? Right? It's like, it's so much. So it's like, how do you craft that narrative, to tell a story in a way that it gives what it needs, but doesn't, create a context where you're given what, doesn't need to be there. And so I would say that was definitely a challenging part. Another challenging part is that it's heavy, right? It's like I'm writing about a lot of this while, I might be driving down the street and get pulled over. So it's like, it wasn't just like an intellectual exercise that I was distant from. It's something that I see, something I experience, something I feel, whether it's me, people I care about, or just experience, even if I don't know, and in this moment, I'm thinking of Sonia Massey. And so it can be difficult because it's such a visceral relationship to a lot of the topics. And so I think that was a challenge at times, but I let it sort of inspire me, and that's leading to, what you mentioned around the final chapter is like a part of what helped me get out of that space was to imagine something else. And then that was just, one, it was an exercise to imagine beyond what currently exists, but it was also something that helped me get a little bit of space and a little bit of breathing room. And that was one of the things that really helped to excite me in moments where it was tricky to do that. Then the other thing is letting it go. For those folks who, might have written a book or, one of the hardest things was saying like, okay, this is ready. Like I'm gonna press send. That was a tricky one. That was a challenge because it never really feels done in a lot of ways. But I pressed send and y'all are here today, so it must have went through. Thank you. Reading. All right, we're gonna do some more reading.
In whichever order you wish.
In whichever order. I like that.
Yes, it's the big sister in me.
Yeah, that's big sis vibes. I love it though. All right, so I'm gonna read a little bit from chapter 6. This was a special chapter for me. As I mentioned, it relied on a lot of imagination. Chapter 6, An Abolitionist Future. Abolition is about presence, not absence. It's about building life-affirming institutions. Ruth Wilson Gilmore. Envision a safe and just world. What do you see? To build a more safe and just world, we have to have the courage to reimagine every aspect of our society. Much of this is centered on transforming how we relate to resources and one another. Picture a place where every human being has access to essentials: food, water, education, healthcare, and housing. This isn't a utopia. It's a world in which the root causes of violence, namely poverty and precarity, are addressed head on. We have to be willing to dream of that world together. What better way to make the case for a police-free world than to show a world where it's possible? Let's dream of a police-free future at the turn of the 22nd century. It's 2105. There are no police. There haven't been for decades. We've learned about them in school and through reading, and really, we learned about what police were from our parents, who learned from their parents. We have been taught that in the United States, they existed since slavery. At first, they were called slave patrols. Their role was to prevent slave rebellions and in capture enslaved people who tried to escape. Hard to believe, right? And while policing evolved over the years and took up different forms, its violence toward Black people and other communities oppressed at the time ran rampant for centuries. We learned that throughout the 1800s and 1900s, police basically did whatever they wanted to. Black communities resisted in sometimes subtle, sometimes loud ways. In the mid-1900s, uprisings, mostly in direct response to police violence, spread throughout the nation. In 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called riots the language of the unheard. That language roared, and it continued to roar in the decades following. But each time it did, the government, as it was called, found ways to preserve and expand the power of police. The state of affairs continued and continued. There were moments of uprisings, other moments of sustained activism, and don't get me started on all the reforms. But the cycle continued. Today in 2105, you'll notice that what's different is not just the lack of police. Everything is different. The entire way we respond to and try to prevent conflict, violence, and harm is different. Police and prisons weren't replaced by single things, but by a constellation of approaches that led to a more safe and just world. The process to bring us to a point where the masses could redesign society in a way that prioritized people and not punishment or profit took a long time. And it wasn't clean or simple. But the approach to cultivating safety was thorough. Those organizing around safety concerns started by canvassing and hosting community meetings in which everyone was asked, what is safety to you? What are your main concerns about safety? They made sure not just to ask about interpersonal harm and violence. Things such as food, security, housing, land, and employment all came up. Through a transformative lens of safety, we came to a much more holistic understanding of how to approach people's needs. So rather than having police stations, now we have community safety hubs. We have safety mobilizations and teams to deal with just about any problem you can think of. Fewer concerns arise as a result of the active preventative efforts, but when they do arise, they're managed peacefully and transformatively, and without the presence of violence work. Now, don't get me wrong. It doesn't mean that things are perfect. There's still a need for safety interventions and preventative approaches. But things in general are much less hectic, and the preventative measures do much of the work to create safety. They include things such as accessible life necessities, community-based safety strategies, and approaches to addressing harm. So much has changed since male domination and patriarchal violence no longer determine how we build institutions, how we are with one another, and how we build social bonds. People learn to share power with one another rather than constantly trying to dominate one another. We all decide how to approach safety. In some places, grandmothers run the community safety hubs. In others, it's their children and children's children who are the stewards of safety work. People decide locally on safety hub initiatives and approaches, and neighboring communities and others that have similar dynamics help. We invite people to be accountable rather than relying on coercive control. If a situation gets out of hand, we have teams that are able to respond with the training and tools necessary to intervene, de-escalate, and try to achieve the best possible outcome and the least possible harm. We come up with plans and approaches to manage our local communities collectively and with autonomy. We don't have to wait around for housing repairs or decisions to come from above. We meet and vote, but mostly we decide through consensus. The people govern in a way that is direct and democratic. In this new world, this new reality we find ourselves in, every single person has a home to call their own, and hunger is just a word in the history books. Our streets echo with laughter and share stories rather than sirens. This isn't a distant dream. It's a vision of a world that moved beyond policing by embracing social transformations. Before, our safety was thought to depend on the police, but we realized that true safety was interwoven with ensuring that everyone's needs were met. Now, grocery stores are like community pantries. You enter, pick what you need, and leave with a nod of gratitude. Imagine walking into a grocery store, not to calculate what you can afford, but simply to get what you need. There are no police or security guards standing watch, no underlying tension, just a community shared understanding that there's enough for all. Just outside, community gardens flourish, their fruits and vegetables available to anyone who passes by. Our elderly are well integrated into community life. They are much healthier and more social, and they have what they need to thrive. People in general live fuller, longer, more active, healthier lives. Once things changed, we moved away from thinking of land as property with arbitrary boundaries. Places still have meaning, but not because of arbitrary countries or citizenship or politics. People live where they want, and collectively we try to make sure that everyone has what they need, regardless of where they are. As you can see, the whole world had to change for police to no longer exist. We realized that we needed a hard reset of society. And it wasn't just about policing. Once people realized that policing was largely about protecting property and maintaining social rules and expectations, we decided to change society altogether. And once society changed, so did the sense that we need police. It wasn't easy, it took struggle, and managing a society without police takes work. But in the end, we're safer for it. You can't create what you can't see. And you can't build what you don't believe is possible. Where this book ends is where I hope your journey of imagination and action will begin. I hope these pages will be a spark that ignites your dreams. Together we can surmount the boundaries of what seemed impossible.
Come on. Come on. How did y'all feel hearing that? I'm going to invite folks in to ask some questions. I'll just say, it definitely had an effect on me as I heard it. And what I find so beautiful about that, as you were reading it, I was reminded of Robin Kelly's Radical Imagination and Ruthie Wilson Gilmore's Life Affirming Institutions. And I was thinking about both of them is so important because so much of what's affected movements, organizing, is our inability to imagine, our inability to dream, and the fact that we've problematized vision work, the political function of vision work. And I love what you said, you can't build what you can't see. That's what you said, right? You can't build what you can't see. And it challenges us into, like, we have a moral, political duty to not descend into pessimism and despair. And part of that is leaning into radical imagination. So just thank you for that. I'd like to invite in folks to ask some questions. So I'm going to go and run a little bit. But please feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, and then we're going to return back to you to read a little bit more as well. And then feel free to, say your name.
Hi, my name is Felix, and I was just wondering, where did you go to? What did you read to kind of help you kind of think of this alternative way of living, without policing? What did you research? Who did you talk to? What inspired you to kind of write that?
That's a great question. Thank you, Felix. Good to see you. I really tried to run the gambit in terms of really unlocking this, the imaginative potential. And really what I did was I thought about essentially almost every aspect of society, every key pillar of society. I tried to think about, and I asked, what are the key works, or what are things that people are saying, so that looking back in history, looking to some contemporary work, and so I really just looked at it, because I think a part of what happens is, right, it's we talk about the police as the police, but it's there's a whole society that develops reliance on policing, and that coheres policing collectively, and so I'm that all has to change. You can't just plug and play one piece. It has to be the whole gambit. And so, I read a lot thinking about the economy, and different kinds of approaches, to thinking about how to organize the economy. Specifically from anti-capitalist perspectives. I thought a lot about the environment. I thought a lot about labor. And so that required going back, to read the folks who, specifically that challenge capitalism, and then also thinking contemporarily, and then thinking about specific things around safety. There's so many dope organizations and organizers that I really look to for inspiration. In terms of contemporary things, so looking at transformative justice, for example. Reading and rereading the work of Mariam Kaba, for example, to think about how we can approach safety in a way that breaks free from punitive logics. And so then I also just drew upon my own experiences, for example. So one of the things that it really bothers me, right? When you go into the grocery store and there's police in there, and it's you got a gun, and so if somebody steals food, the rationale is you're willing to shoot them. And what kind of world, do we live in where there's enough food for everybody, but there's an entity willing to kill somebody for food? And if you take it a step further, say that costs $70,000, $80,000 a year, right, to finance. What would it look like to create a fund? Anybody who needs it, who can't afford, can draw into that $70,000, $80,000. So it was just I was seeing things, just in direct experience. I was reading, as widely as possible around labor, the economy, healthcare, housing, safety, colonialism, thinking about it and its legacies. And so I dug deep, and I really like tried to get inspiration from all the dope folks that have written and that, write today on these issues and really like movements. The first time I heard about police abolition was through organizing with BYP 100. That was like some of the first times I started to hear people talking about like community safety, alternatives, police abolition. I'm like, and so that became very clear that like what sort of was always on the front of my mind, or like what are folks saying, and there is a lot of dream work that is happening even today in a lot of the different collectives and organizations that really are on the front lines of thinking about some issues. So I really just try to think expansively. I try to think about the big picture, because there's a way in which thinking about the issues in a siloed way makes us lose track, of the broader picture, which is why even in the history section, I'm reading about, like I'm digging into the history of policing, and I'm seeing like colonialism and the transnational dimensions all over it, so it's like, okay, this is really global and universal in scope. So thank you for that question. Good to see you.
Oh, hello. Hi, cousin.
I am her aunt. I haven't met them. I am Philip's aunt. I have to do this. I'm sorry I wasn't in your life. But we're behind you.
Thank you.
But she's up and coming.
Yes.
And she also understands what's happening. So I'm going to let her express herself. But hello, niece.
Hello.
You look just like her. So I asked her, was that, you all twins?
Yes.
Indeed. All right, let's hear this question. I'm excited to hear your
I
question.
just had to do that.
Yeah, no,
now
for
I'm
sure.
going to let you do that.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Oh, okay.
We.
Come, go ahead. Go ahead.
How would we live without police to help us if people robbed us?
That's a really important question. Thank you for that. It's a question that I've thought about a lot. So, I think the first thing is to ask, like, why do people rob people? And there's a number of different answers, but I think oftentimes in communities where people have what they need, people are less likely to, engage in those kinds of behaviors that it's not nice, it's not good. So I think the first thing is saying, like, what is leading to that, right? And then trying to get to the root of that, to really figure that out and trying to change those conditions. And then it's saying there's a lot of police that exist in society now, and people still get robbed, and then when they do get robbed, often there's maybe an investigation, but it usually doesn't come up from it. Like, doesn't, result in anything. And then people are left with the harm of that experience, and then also without whatever they lost. And so, one of the things I think about is like, one, again, is to get at those underlying things, but what does it look like to have responses, or people that care about safety, right? That are community-based, that are present in public spaces to try to cultivate a sense of safety. But then also, if things do happen, to have some people, a team, some folks that can respond to say, why did this happen? What happened? And what do you need in this moment to be, restored and repaired? And let's try to figure out a plan to address the root causes and try to make sure that this doesn't happen again. But that's a very good question. Thank you so much. And we could talk about it. We could talk about it after, later too. So thank you for that. That's a great question. Thank you. Corey.
What's up? For those of you that I'm just seeing for the first time, my name is Corey Scott. A whole bunch of hyphenated things. I want to answer your question about how it felt to hear it. It felt fantastical and light and airy. Is my response to that. And I want to connect that to, I was sitting thinking about, I began my work in community organizing in 1999 in Chicago. The first police-involved shooting I remember was Tanya Haggerty. She was shot by the police who claimed they thought her cell phone was a gun. We've heard that story before. But it was June 1999, June 16, 1999. And so for those of us who have been doing this work for, I guess, decades, I'm aging myself, I want to say thank you for the work that you spent to relieve some of the pressure and anxiety that we have to answer all the questions of community around us about, so you're for police abolition. What the hell are we going to do without police? Like, how do we address a society when robberies, when different things happen? So can you just speak to your conceptualization on what it would give to us, activists, organizers, academics, what your hope for the book was for us? And before you answer, I just want to say how exceptionally proud I am of you, how beautiful this moment is, how much I know you pour into your students, how much I know you pour into this book, and I don't ever want to take for granted your labor and your presence in my life, and in all of ours. I love you deeply, and I'm extremely, he's not my biological brother, but I probably feel like you, listen, thank you for the invite. I'm so proud of you. I'm so, like, I cannot even grasp the words, and I know how hard it is to write a book. Bro, I know how hard it is. So that makes me even more proud of you. And I just wanted to say that openly in front of all of these people, for all of the men like me who will never get the opportunity to vocalize that to you. I see you. I love you.
Thank you, brother. I love you too. Thank you for that. That's a great question, because as I mentioned, there are different sort of things I had in mind with writing this. One is to like serve as an entry point for folks who might say like, I don't know about this stuff, right? It's to serve as an entry point for that in order to really, dig into that. But the other aspect was also, as you mentioned, for activists and organizers, there's a few things that I had in mind. One is like thinking about some of the questions that I developed, that I learned within organizing spaces. Questions about whether it's sort of framing or how to understand certain things, or just like the history, or things about unanswered questions, right? Like about this, when we think about policing, that was something that was important for me. So I tried to like think about those questions that I either had or like I've heard within spaces around, within organizing spaces. And so I try to like get at like a lot of those questions, and I try to do it with nuance and sincerity. So I would say that. I definitely think like I try to engage in imagination work, and I think, as my sister mentioned, Robin Kelly's Freedom Dreams is a very important book to me, and I think, I try in that vein to really, help us collectively. And of course, my vision, this is the vision I present, but I think envisioning and world building is a collective effort, and so I wanted to also inspire other folks to dream and imagine with me. And so I think that that's definitely another important part as well. So thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Okay, we have time for, we have 2 more questions.
All right, I won't make it short. We're multi-generational here, and I am one that has been big on when something goes wrong and I can't get a foothold, I will call the police. And I found that they have made a structural change that when they're dealing with the mentally disturbed, they're trying to develop different entities instead of the police. You have your hands full. That's all want to say to that. You have your hands full, because outside of them, we have to be structured. And first, to me, I find we have a tendency not to be as supportive of each other as we should be. So that's going to be, to me, the task. That's going to be the task.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's definitely, thank you for your question. I think that many people, when there's an absence of alternatives, feel compelled to call the police. And so that's really what I'm trying to push in this, is that even when we think about 911 as a number, it hasn't existed for that long. It wasn't until the 1960s that it even emerged, and it wasn't even until the 1980s that it became available to a large segment of society. And so we could have other numbers, we could have other responses, and it just requires daring to dream. There's also models that I talk about in the book, models like Cahoots, which deploys crisis response teams, models like MH First, the Healing and Justice Center in Miami, Detroit Safety Team. There's just so many organizations that I list in this book that address different kinds of harm and violence, and so different issues that emerge. And so I think that that is a big part of the work, is creating alternative. Just imagine a world in which the only response to fires was the police. It wouldn't even make any sense. Or medical emergency. It just doesn't. It's. And I think that when we think about any scenario, that's my argument, is that we can start from scratch and develop new approaches to how we approach all of these things, in addition to trying to get at the underlying causes of them to begin with. And another part of the book is also the community aspect, right? It's we keep us safe, is a abolitionist, motto. And so I think in that effort, I think, there is a lot of work that can happen. But a part of what happens is that the policing and criminal legal system makes us outsource our relationship to safety. And so I think getting on top of that is having conversations, making plans, developing community-based, approaches, thinking about what it looks like to care for one another, in deep and committed ways. And so I think that that's a important aspect of it as well, is this community aspect. And I think the Black Panthers, for example, in their survival programs, is a model of that kind of work, of deep community care, while also engaging in resistance against policing and state violence. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. Or good evening, my bad. It's been a long day. My name is John McFarland. I'm an active member of Vocal New York. I want to start by saying I'm formerly incarcerated. When I met you earlier today, because when I was one of the first folks to arrive, I thought you stood on the shoulders of folks that did the abolition work. But listening to you, you stand alongside them, my brother. Good people like Derica, Purnell, Mariam Kaba, Tanishi Coates, you stand alongside them, so I respect you for that. Number one. Number two, I would like to know how somebody like me could plug in with you. What are your next steps outside of your book tour? Shameless plug, I'm trying to get to Philly, where my brother lives, to see you out there as well. But what are your next steps after the book tour? How do you plan to engage folks, interested folks like me, in walking alongside you while you're doing this work? Thank you, my brother. I appreciate you.
For sure. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that, offering and that question. I think one, reaching out to me, I would love to connect. I think, as I mentioned, community building is an important aspect, and things get done in community. So I think that's definitely a piece. And, part of what I wanted to do, with this book and through this process is to build those, build community with folks who are doing this work, to be able to, and there's a lot of folks doing this work, but, my goal was to try to build community with folks doing the work, to be able to build bridges. And, the reality is abolition is a vision, and there's work that's required to actualize any vision, and so the work is done in community. And so I think connecting with folks has been, for me, and staying, tapped in and engaging both both locally, but also trying to create bridges for folks alongside other folks who have created, already created bridges, is something that's important to me. And there's a number of different abolitionist networks and folks doing organizing work. So I would love to tap in and connect. And I think that it really just, really requires that labor, and that courage to try to change some of these things and approach. And there's a bunch of people, including people in this room, who have been doing a lot of that work. So, I would love to make those bridges. And this is why, this tour is for the book, but it's about building, beyond policing. So thank you for that, my brother. Appreciate you.
Peace, power. My name is Donovan Severus, an organizer at the Justice Committee. Word. Heard you was a member. Word. Peace, John. Yeah, so there's a difference between, and I'm sure that listening to the excerpts of the book, there's a difference between posing the question of like imagining a world beyond policing, and then there's the different side of that is like this explicit articulation of one of many possible visions of that. So in chapter 6, when you do that, one, how did you feel about doing that, and then two, how did you land there?
Great question. Yeah, I mentioned it earlier. It was definitely, in part, it was definitely inspirational, but it also felt liberating in a way. As I mentioned, like a lot of these things had been on my mind, had been, I experienced in my body, and I really tried to wrestle and think through a lot of this. And so like this was like my time to really like think beyond and not just. Miriam Kaba has a a quote and an offering around that policing and the criminal legal system, it disciplines our imagination, and so for me it felt like in many ways a form of trying to push beyond that, to not allow that to just be the record, and so I think that was an important aspect for me, and so it felt good. It felt exciting, to be honest. Like as I was working on different aspects of it, it felt weathering at times, and it felt difficult and challenging to keep pushing. But once I realized like, okay, no, I don't want to just like write about like the history and the current realities. I want to like think beyond all this. I really want to put myself in the space of like a world that doesn't exist, to really think about what that would look like. It excited me. It reinvigorated my relationship to ideas and thinking about this movement more broadly. And so I think that it definitely, it definitely felt good. And and I just sat and I imagined, and and through that process, I came to, what I present in that chapter. I'm looking forward to you reading it. Looking forward to y'all reading it as well.
Thank you. Would you like to read? Would you like to give us one more offering from the book?
Boo, 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 boo. All right, let's see what's up. I'm gonna pick a good one for y'all. All right. Thank you.
Everything in there good.
Thank you. I know what I'm gonna read. Part B, Butterflies in Cleveland. We gonna be all right. The summer air in Cleveland was thick with purpose as the movement for Black Lives convening commenced at the tail end of July 2015. The city was filled with more than 1,000 Black organizers and activists from across the country, as well as activists from abroad. Cleveland State University's campus glowed with the energy of nearly 2,000 individuals, including members from a number of organizations affiliated with the movement for Black Lives, student organizers, and more. It was a powerful convening of organizers and communities, including the families of people murdered by the police. One of my duties was to pick up some of the family members from the airport and drive them to the convening location. Throughout the weekend, I was forced to reflect on the pain caused by the loss of a loved one at the hands of police. The movement was uplifting, and organizers strategized ways to transform Black communities, including ways to address the violence of policing. But what happened as the convening ended soon turned into the same issues we discussed at Cleveland State. Outside the walls of the campus, people anxiously talked about a young boy, only 14 years old, who had been taken into custody by Cleveland police officers. The allegation, intoxication on a bus. I was with a close friend, Carl, taking a walk outside as the convening was ending, and we hurried to the scene where the team was in the police car. Within moments, hundreds of us from the Movement for Black Lives convening mobilized, forming a human barrier around the officers and their vehicles. Our demands were clear. The boy needed medical attention, and he belonged with his mother and not in a cell. Media accounts would later highlight the pepper spray, the growing crowd, and the police's justification for their actions. But those present experienced something far deeper, a moment of raw emotion, community solidarity, and the visceral power of collective action. For me, the scene was a blur of adrenaline and purpose. As pepper spray filled the air, many of us already knew of one solution shared by Palestinian organizers on social media during unrest in Ferguson: the use of milk to help treat the burn of pepper spray and tear gas. I, along with some others, sprinted to nearby stores, buying whatever milk we could find to aid those affected. Most of us didn't know each other, but we were united in our commitment, the freedom of this teenager. As the boy's mother arrived in the negotiations, led by Rukia Lumumba and Beatrice Beckford from the Malcolm X grassroots movement, reached an end, the volume of our chants rose. We love you. We love you. We love you. We didn't know his name, but it didn't matter. He mattered. Experiencing police violence had a convening sparked by an uprising against police violence. Ironic, but this is the violence of policing. Celebrating, we chanted, "We gonna be all right," lyrics from Kendrick Lamar's All Right from his album To Pimp a Butterfly. The police eventually retreated. At one point, a butterfly flew overhead. It gave me chills as those of us in the area pointed, elated at the butterfly. It was surreal. That day in Cleveland was not just about a single arrest. It was about the spirit of a movement that refuses to be silenced. It was a demonstration that, with unity and perseverance, change is within our grasp. Our demand remains steadfast, a world that transcends the need for policing, a world in which every life is cherished and protected. On a large scale, the kind of collective solidarity and commitment I witnessed in Cleveland has the power to free us all. The reality is that most people don't have community defense mobilizations when they face harm from police. But how can we build the capacity to create shields that disrupt policing? How can we engage in practices of community defense? It required putting our bodies on the line to demand that a teenager be free. Getting pepper sprayed was worth it. The boy got to go home with his mother, not a police station. That was community defense in action.
So as we move to a close, I'm gonna invite you in to say some final words, some last words before we move to a book signing. But I just want to share a couple things. Is that okay?
That's all right.
That's all right. How y'all feeling? Excellent, excellent. Good, great. There's this quote that I think of often, and as Philip was reading the book, it just weighed on me. So it was beating on me. It's a quote by Fanon, and he had said, each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. And I think about that quote often, especially in moment and times like this where we're faced with such critical questions about who are we willing to be? Who are we willing to become? And I have to say, as I feel like that's a generational question where we all have to grapple with this. Because as we think about a world beyond policing, a world without police, we have to remember that the one thing that has always remained true throughout the course of human history is change. We are not where we were 50 years ago. We are not where we were 100 years ago. We were not where we were 10 years ago. And 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 100 years from now, we get to choose right now what future generations get to enter into. And as we say, the future is not predetermined, but it is decisively based on the decisions that we decide now. And so as you read that 6th chapter, as you talk about this book, we have a moral and political obligation to dream, to vision, and challenge any small talk inside of us that tells us that it is wrong and that is a distraction. So one, this book is such, for me, it's a love letter, it's an invitation, it's an act of courage. But I also have to say thank you. I have had the profound, what am I going to say? I look at my sister. And my mama. I've had the profound honor to watch your brilliance. One of the most meaningful experiences of my life is to be a witness to your journey. Philip V. McHarris, you are incredibly brilliant. You are incredibly courageous. You overwhelm everybody in your presence with just how powerfully kind, warm, brilliant, rebellious, loving you are. And you decided to do the hard work to create a book. And for us, what we get to have is this beautiful book. But the labor, the heart, the time that you poured into a book that is your book, but it is an offering to us, an invitation to us, a love letter to us, to not just know our history, but to remind ourselves that we come from the mouths and the shoulders of people who decided to dream. And so I just want to say thank you. Thank you. And if y'all can join me with just showing him some love for this book, this offering. And we could do better than that. We could do better than that. We could do better than that. Because what joy will I have years from now when we talk about this book, this offering, what it was able to provide for us in terms of thought leadership.
I thought at the beginning I got emotional, but yeah, it just continued. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I feel it. You know, it's been surreal. The book came out, this week. But this is making me, it makes it feel real. I feel grounded. I feel present. And I feel good. This is like, a homecoming in many ways, to see so many people that have helped guide me, steer me, be in solidarity, support, in community with. And so I'm very honored to be here with you all. Thank you so much for coming out. And I hope that, this book allows us to collectively dream together. So thank you. And thank you too, my sister, for moderating it. I love you. Yeah.
Doing it right here.
Yeah.
If you have a book, come on over.
Let's get some signing in.
They have the books in the back.
Yeah.
Thank y'all.
Thank y'all. Thank you so much. We get a line going and get the signing going. Thank you.